I just want to end with one last kind of thought as a takeaway and maybe like a homework piece for each of us. They talk about this coronavirus as being a plague of biblical proportions, right? There's that phrase coined, a plague of biblical proportions. So what does that mean? It just means this is really massive and big, and it brings countries to their knees, and right. But if you think about biblical proportions, if you look actually in the Bible, in the Torah, I think the plague that most stands out as kind of similar, eerily similar to what people are experiencing with coronavirus is, of course, sa'arat, where it's sort of this discoloration that comes to the surface, and it can come to a person's skin, suddenly to a person's skin or to their clothes or to the walls of their house. And then the remedy to that is isolation, is to going and sitting alone outside of the camp and isolating oneself from the community. And which is exactly kind of what all of us are, the entire globe on a level that's never happened in history, is experiencing hopefully some medicinal form of isolation from the camp. And obviously we're connecting to each other here and now, and we're finding ways to connect even in that, but still I think that's obviously a big theme that's happening right now. So what's wonderful about when we look at Sa'arat, which of course is mistranslated as leprosy, but it's really its own kind of biblical disease. Sa'arat it shows up on, again, this idea of it showing up on the surfaces, and it's when the poison gets to the level of visibility. So often our poisons are kept tightly under the surface. It's like these things that we keep under the surface, and like, you don't want anybody to know about the hard things. But with Sa'arat, it's like, no, it's coming to the skin, and it's coming to the clothes, it's coming to the walls. And it's like this real unearthing of toxicity, which brings with it embarrassment. It brings with it shame. It brings with it all of these things that, on the one hand, feel really uncomfortable, but at the same time are really cleansing, for when these things come to the surface. And so, I'm sure you've all experienced in your own life these painful places where something has come to the surface, and it's been something maybe you didn't want to see, or you don't want other people to see, but here it is, and like, we got to deal with it. And the blessing of that is that you start to deal with it, and needed to be dealt with. And that's why it's coming to a surface. They talk about how the Mashiach, the Messiah, is said to be a leper. That's how he's described, as a Metzora, is one of the adjectives for the Mashiach. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe says why is because in the Messianic era, the plagues of humanity will be brought to the surface in order to be dealt with. They'll be fully dealable with and visible and palpable in a way that actually is redemptive. And I feel like we're experiencing, please God, the redemptive side of the plagues that are these things under the surface that are now coming through. But what's so beautiful is the teaching, of course, from the Rashi, and the famous Rashi, when it talks about the languaging around Sa'arat is so interesting, because it talks about how you can get this plague, and it can show up on your clothes, on your skin, and it talks about when it shows up on your walls. And it says, God says, when I give you the land of Canaan, and you come in to possess it, and when I give you the plague of Sa'arat on your walls, then da-da-da-da-da-da. And there's this really, it's like a cognitive dissonance moment of, wait, what do you mean when you give us? Like this is a gift or something? Okay, like there's a languaging around it of gifting that Rashi picks up on, and is like, whoa, what is that? What is that about? How can this plague be a gift? And then Rashi's comment on it is that the gift is that for the people who it's coming upon the walls of their house, it's a sign that there's gold buried underneath the walls. And when they have to dismantle the walls because of the discoloration, then they find the gold that was placed there by its former inhabitants. And then all of a sudden, the discoloration is coming to show you that there's a treasure buried in the very place of that plague. And so maybe it's a historical reference, but really it's a metaphorical reference, right, to what happens when something finally comes to the surface and it looks bad on the surface, but you do that work of chipping it away and dismantling it and dealing with it. You get treasure, you get gifts, like big time gifts, when we actually allow that to come to the surface and we work with it. Then we get golden treasures, because and I'm not even talking about like the products. I'm talking about the process. The very process of going in and seeing the muck and dealing with it and dealing with the symptoms, that process is the treasure. And then there's treasures that come from the process, the product we get of it, but just the process of going through this that we're all doing, there's treasures in this. And I'm sure you've felt them, whether it's the treasure of your time with your family, or going inside, and or your anxiety and what you're learning from it about yourself and how to handle it better. Like there's just ample treasures here. So I love it that the Torah has this sort of kind of subversive text line underneath the surface of the text, where it seems to be talking about this awful plague, but the message of the text is saying to us, good, God is giving you the gift of this sickness. Good, Mazel Tov, Messianic, Yalla, Mashiach Ba. And so I just want to leave that as a thought to ponder and to take, for all of us to take with us, is like, there are gifts here. Let us mine them well. What are the gifts? And like really bringing those gifts to our awareness and consciousness, and living from that place. Living from that place of like, wow, thank you, God. Thank you, God. I'm growing so much from this. I'm having breakthroughs in my prayer and in my emunah and in my care for others, and humanity is having breakthroughs, and thank you, God. So that's what I want to bless us with, is that the riches of this should really, we should be the inheritors and the creators of the golden goods of this time. And even though it's hard, and especially because it's hard.